After months of military rule and deadly protests, Sudan has inched closer towards a civilian government, hoping to turn the page on longtime leader Omar al-Bashir, currently on trial for corruption. The military and Sudan's opposition formed a ruling council. If all goes well, elections will be held by 2022. Turkey, which has decades-long economic ties with Sudan, sent Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu to witness the signing of the power-sharing deal. During his visit, Cavusoglu emphasized that Ankara's support to Sudan will continue. Relations between the two countries have been growing since Erdogan's visit in 2017, which was the first by a Turkish president to Sudan. But as the country starts a new chapter, will past-friendly relations continue? And can Turkey play a mediating role between the competing parties in Sudan? To answer those questions, joining me now is Joseph Ochieno, who is a commentator on African affairs, and Eylem Tepeciklioglu, who is the author of the book Turkish Foreign Policy in Africa. She is also a lecturer at the International Law Implementation and Research Center based here in Istanbul. So Eylem, Joseph, thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So leaders of both military and civilian opposition were sworn in, thus paving a way for a democratic dispensation. Now the country has a 11-member ruling council. Eylem, how significant was this power-sharing deal for Sudan? And will Sudan see peace and stability until elections can be held?
Well, it's an important question because, Sudan is now in the transition period, and like all transitions, it's not going to be an easy one. The deal signed between the opposition and the civilians, it's not a perfect one, but it's a turning point in Sudanese politics, But the question if there will be peace in Sudan in the long or near future, it depends on various factors,
Like what?
Like, the many internal and international actors are involved in Sudanese politics. Like, there's the opposition, which is divided at all means, and the military, there's the military. Military is by no means a unified force. In Sudan, there are, militias, Islamist militias, paramilitary organizations as well, and there are fears that those remnants of the al-Bashir regime, they would like to keep power.
Their power, yeah.
Yeah, their power.
So, Joseph, how will this new interim government play out, given the fact that military is set to have the upper hand in this new administration, as well as other factors Eylem just mentioned? What do you make of that?
I mean, technically, it should be presented that the military doesn't have, that apparently it is, if you like, nuanced as balanced, to the extent that actually part of the presentation, attempted presentation, is that the opposition has an upper hand. But as you quite rightly say, I think the military, by and large, do have an upper hand in the sense that they continue to control the system, including the fact that they're going to lead for slightly longer. But I think that having been said, it's a landmark in the sense that things have changed for the first time in a very, very long time in Sudan. Power is not directly controlled 100% by the military. And for the first time, by and large, on the African continent, except for revolutionary military opposition, the civilians have successfully managed to push a military administration and to compel the military to come to table and have, if you like, a negotiated settlement. So what happens over the next 3 years is going to be a balancing act. But I think, as earlier said by Eylem, I think it's important. How do they play it in such a manner that they bring in a settlement of the opposition that is not happy? The Darfurians are not particularly happy. The outstanding issues in...
So it's not a 100% compromise?
It's not a 100%. And in fact, the armed opposition, by and large, are not particularly very satisfied with this. So how they play out is extremely important. The military, much as they may be a threat, I think it would be very, very risky for them to think they're actually going to play a game with the current nature of the Sudanese opposition, which I may say, by and large, is massively led by an awakened Sudanese women.
So there are some concerns that the military council may delay the implementation of some clauses, and eventually they may push civilians out of that ruling council. Is that possible?
Well, there's always this risk. And in a country like Sudan, who has been governed by military rule for long periods, it's always possible that the military might not want to cede power to civilians, you know, and because there are also fears that the military can use this new power to enrich themselves and their supporters, you know.
Yeah, and we see that Joseph Military will be controlling the defense and interior ministries, which account for a large part of national spending. What do you make of that?
I wish I were a fly in the process of the negotiations. How the military managed to retain these two ministries, I actually genuinely don't understand. The defense ministry, yes, I understand. But interior, I'm actually genuinely not sure. But don't forget that actually, yes, the opposition went in here rather weak from the beginning because of the substantial element of inexperience and as Ali suggested, maybe a bit of disagreements over generally. But I think the good hope is this, that there's no way in which the current military setup in the Sudan, as it is, can play an Egypt in the Sudan, because the international community is looking. But by and large, the Sudanese opposition is much more emboldened. You know, however fractured, they're much more emboldened than ever before. So,
what made Sudan protests unique, other than for example, other Arab Spring countries?
Or indeed, predominantly African protests, and many have been watching very, very carefully. It's the case that many young Sudanese surprised, including the main established political opposition in Sudan, the political parties, they're surprised by the Professionals Association and ordinary Sudanese who simply were prepared to get shot at and continue. And they went to the military headquarters and said, you can kill all of us here, but we're not going to leave. Yeah. So the option is, if the military this is the softest landing opportunity for the military. Anything other than that, there is ICC. Anything other than that, there's a continuation of isolation. Anything other than that, there is a determination on who killed in Darfur. Yeah. And some of the leaders of the movement are named in that process.
Yeah, unfortunately. Eylem, let's talk about Turkey. What could you tell us about Turkey's position both during and aftermath the crisis?
Well, Turkey actually followed a wait-and-see policy during the first phase, actually. But it condemned the coup as expected, you know, because in a country like Turkey experienced military coup that has regularly
over 200 Turkish citizens.
And erupting the political life of the country on a regular basis. We should not be surprised that Turkey is against the use of military coups as a means to bring regime change. But Turkey also sided with the Sudanese people and always expressed that Turkey is with the Sudanese people. And
why Turkey is interested in Sudan?
Well, actually, it's a part of Turkey's larger Africa policy. You know, Turkey has opened to Africa in late 1990s, and Africa occupies an important place in Turkish foreign policy priorities right now. And Sudan is an important African country, the largest African country, being one of the most populous African countries. And it's an important ally of Turkey, having Turkey and Sudan have you know, long and centuries old.
Joseph, what do you make of Turkey's Sudan policies? Do you believe that the friendly relations will continue in the upcoming process?
I think it's an imperative much more for Turkey, and I think Turkey has played it quite right, for slightly perhaps different and nuanced reasons, because the backers of the military in Sudan, particularly the Emiratis and Saudis and to an extent Egyptians, have not necessarily been strategically the best friends of Turkey. So in a way, there's an element of that. But generally, Turkey's own broader growing economic might and power is such that they genuinely needed to have friends anywhere in Africa. And Sudan happened to be very strategically located. Port Sudan, interests in mining and constructions that Turkey ought to be able to get engaged in. And yes, Turkey is perhaps the most unique, predominantly Muslim country, which is also generally democratic. It must be seen to be playing the democratic process. I would rather see Turkey continue to play a bigger role, because interestingly, the more actually they did, the better perhaps it's likely that not only will they help to counter their opponents in the region, but perhaps it may be a net benefit for the broader opposition in Sudan, which is predominantly Muslim, but in a way we are simply saying we're also trying to play secular and democratic.
So briefly, there are a lot of challenges ahead of Sudan. So how will this new government tackle these challenges in a way to end the cycle of bad governance that led to the civil unrest? Eylem.
Well, the main challenge for the new regime is the economic problems that they have inherited. So Sudan needs international assistance, and it needs it fast because there is always, as we discussed before, there is always the risk that the military might not want to transfer power to civilians following this 2 years.
Yes.
Let's say. So any international assistance must also emphasize military reforms.
Yeah.
And Turkey's role could be its increasing investment projects and humanitarian involvement in the country because, Turkey has a holistic approach, combining peace building, peace efforts with development and humanitarian assistance development projects. So coupled with Turkey's unique identity.
Eylem, Joseph, thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. Appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having me.